The recap begins with a scene that unfolds in a slum where children run through the streets, their attention suddenly drawn to a golem approaching. Some of them eagerly call out to it, urging it to trade with them so they can get food. Someone explains that within Sector 50, a mysterious golem exists, its origins and owner unknown. However, what truly matters is its peculiar trade, offering food in exchange for junk. As the golem's eyes flash red, it surveys the area before abruptly turning away. The children express their frustration, recalling that it had accepted a flashlight the previous day but often refuses to take certain items without explanation. While they speculate on its behavior, another boy silently observes from above. His friend warns him against taking any rash actions, reminding him that there have been incidents where golems entered the streets and killed people. Despite the warning, curiosity gets the better of him. He leaps down from his perch, landing directly in front of the golem. Removing the strap of his backpack, he offers it up. The golem's eyes flash once more before it carefully takes the bag, lifting it over its head and pouring the contents into its mouth. The others watch in shock as, instead of rejecting the trade, it begins dispensing an unusually large amount of food in return. Jealous murmurs spread through the crowd as they question why it always takes his items and why he consistently receives more than the rest. The amount he gets would last at least 3 days. Some even consider taking it from him by force, but one of them points out his reputation, the ghost of 17th Street. The perspective shifts to that very street, also part of Sector 50, where the boy walks through a narrow alleyway. Though he moves calmly, the sound of multiple footsteps behind him reveals he is being followed. A quick assessment tells him there are 7 individuals trailing him. He calls them out, demanding to know how long they plan to keep up their pursuit. The group acknowledges his sharp senses, impressed that he noticed them despite their careful approach. One of them, a figure resembling a pig and equipped with brass knuckles, steps forward. His name is Ron. Ray, the boy, immediately recognizes him and coldly reminds him of the last warning he gave. If he ever showed his face again, he would make sure he would never walk again. Ron only laughs, dismissing the threat. He makes it clear that he has no intention of letting Ray leave as easily as last time. With a smug expression, he demands that Ray simply hand over the food. If he complies, he will be allowed to walk away unharmed. However, Ray refuses, calling out Ron's lie, knowing full well that they won't let him go so easily. Among the children, a rumor persists about a ghost that roams 17th Street. A pale figure that moves in silence, devoid of expression, and one that no one should ever meet eyes with, or else their lies will be exposed. As this thought lingers, Ron's hands begin to tremble. Masking his fear with anger, he charges forward, determined to silence such arrogance for good. Ray swiftly evades the attack, extending a foot to trip Ron before pivoting and grabbing him by the back of his shirt. A precise strike to the gut follows, knocking the air from Ron's lungs and sending him collapsing to the ground. The other boys call out his name, realizing that letting their companion fall so easily is not an option. Without hesitation, they rush in together, determined to overwhelm Ray. One of them leaps into the air wielding a bat, but Ray ducks under the swing and counters with an elbow to the face, sending his opponent stumbling. Another rushes in to assist, only to be caught mid-motion, blood flying from the impact. Capitalizing on the confusion, Ray presses forward, delivering a devastating flying knee. As the last of them hesitates, his cold gaze settles on the remaining boy, whose screams join the chaos as the fight continues. When the dust settles, Ray calmly remarks that simply bringing more people will never change the outcome. Fear now grips Ron, who recoils, calling Ray a monster and warning him to stay back. Despite his trembling, Ron grips a hidden knife and suddenly swings it forward in desperation, repeating his words. Ray glances down at the blade, noting the unsteady hands holding it. He acknowledges that monster might not be such a bad description. Reflecting on his past, he recalls a moment from childhood when he first realized he was different. Around the age of 10, he had scraped his leg, yet while others expected him to cry, he simply questioned why pain should warrant tears. There was another time when a friend was attacked by kids from 7th Street. While others seethed with anger, Ray could only wonder why such emotions were necessary. When one of the boys died, grief consumed the group, yet Ray sat among them, expressionless as whispers of fear surrounded him. It was then that he understood, something within him was missing. He could not experience what others called emotions. For years he questioned himself, wondering if he was in the wrong, if he could ever be like everyone else. Even now, 6 years later, he remains unchanged. He cannot feel as others do, but he has learned to read the emotions of those around him. Ray reminds Ron that using blades is an unspoken rule not to be broken, questioning whether he had intended to stab him from the start. Ron insists that he only picked it up from a nearby trash can, but Ray immediately detects the lie. A purple aura lingers around Ron's chest, revealing his deception. With his unique ability, Ray perceives a world unseen by others. Within every person, a vessel exists, filling with mana based on their emotions. Anger, hatred, and love manifest as red. Ridicule and apathy turn blue. Joy and excitement shine yellow. Countless other emotions create an intricate spectrum of colors. His world is painted with these swirling hues, forming a breathtaking yet chaotic scene. Despite his bravado, Ron remains paralyzed, trembling as he warns Ray to stay back. The aura around him deepens into black, a pure manifestation of terror. Ray slowly approaches, unfazed by the threats. As Ron stumbles backward, his panic reaches its peak. His vision blurs, his body shakes uncontrollably, and he presses against the wall, unable to escape. A liar like him, Ray declares, deserves punishment. He extends a hand toward Ron. Elsewhere, Ray walks beneath a bridge, making his way toward a shelter. Upon entering, he is greeted by a group of children, one of whom calls out his name. This is Pale, the leader of the underpass children. The others rush to him, relieved by his return. As the group gathers, they begin to assess the day's earnings. The pile before them is meager, barely enough to split among 7 people. Even Pale hesitates, uncertain if it will sustain them. Then Ray reveals what he has acquired from the golem. The others react with admiration, already expecting nothing less from him. Unlike their failed attempts, Ray managed to trade with the golem. He explains that the golem only accepts magical items containing residual mana, something invisible to those without the ability to perceive it. With Ray's contributions, the group now has enough to share. Pale distributes the food, starting with the youngest, Josephine, ensuring that each child gets a fair portion. Ray steps outside, lost in thought. The struggle to gather enough food has never ceased, and the burden of supporting this group remains his responsibility. If necessary, he considers returning to the warehouse. After all, he owes them his life. A year ago, buried in snow, he had resigned himself to death. Yet, these children had found him, struggling to pull him from the cold. They had seen the faint breath of life within him and felt true relief at his survival. From that moment on, he vowed to repay his debts, whether through gratitude or vengeance. As he stands there, Pale's voice calls out to him, drawing his attention back to the present. Pale insists that Ray should take his share as well. Ray nods but claims he isn't hungry, turning away. His stomach betrays him with a loud rumble, prompting Pale to break a cracker in half and offer it to him. Shifting the conversation, Pale mentions the black rain falling outside, explaining that heavy use of magic in the past may have altered the world's weather patterns. He speculates that things without mana might lack color entirely. The discussion shifts to mages, who live in lower-numbered sectors under vastly different conditions than those in the slums. Pale is convinced that the golem is the creation of a mage, while Ray entertains the possibility that it is merely a machine. However, Pale insists that magic keeps it running, his eyes filled with excitement. Eventually, Ray acknowledges that he shares the same belief. Observing the golem's movements, he notes how it absorbs ambient mana, channels it into its core, and releases it as black gas, reinforcing his suspicions. Despite these thoughts, he has more pressing matters to address. As he prepares to leave, Pale questions his destination. Ray states his intentions, unfazed by the heavy black rain. Pale warns him about the dangers, but Ray dismisses his concerns, instructing him to keep an eye on the river to prevent it from overflowing. Without hesitation, he takes off, leaving Pale to sigh at his usual reckless behavior. At the intersection of 17th and 18th Street, he notes how people avoid stepping outside when it rains, fearing that even a single drop of black rain could make them ill. Yet he moves through it freely, shielding himself with a faint blue aura. His destination is the Limfoot Hector Ration Warehouse on 18th Street. Upon arrival, he spots several workers inside, gambling as they always do on rainy days. Exploiting the lax security, he sneaks under the fence, shifts a few bricks at the base of the wall and slips inside. The darkness is thick, but the air is saturated with various types of mana. Drawing in specific colors, he combines them into the right formula, producing a reddish glow. Small flames form in his hand, illuminating his surroundings. Though unfamiliar with the exact mechanics, he knows how to manipulate this power. However, controlling red mana proves to be more difficult than expected. He speculates whether he will eventually be able to fully perceive the emotions tied to it and wonders if he can generate a larger flame. A sudden attack interrupts his thoughts. A knife whizzes through the air, narrowly missing him and grazing his ear before embedding itself into the wall. A voice rings out, mocking him for finally showing up and attempting to steal their rations. The speaker, amused by Rei's quick reflexes, suggests that they had been lying in wait from the very beginning. Laughter echoes through the space as Rei quickly assesses the situation. There are 3 of them and they know exactly where he is. The unexpected presence of night vision goggles among the opponents comes as a surprise, though Rei has no need for them. One of the men raises a knife and hurls it toward him. More follow, flying through the air as Rei maneuvers in a zigzag pattern, dodging each one with precise movements. His unpredictable approach catches them off guard, leaving them wondering what kind of person they are dealing with. While one dismisses it as poor aim, another insists that Rei is actually evading their attacks. Closing the distance, Rei lands a clean strike to the face, sending one of them to the ground. The remaining 2 freeze in shock, unable to understand how he can see them so clearly. He studies them, observing the emotions in their eyes, rage and surprise, as well as the vessels within their chests. They attempt to recover, launching another attack, but Rei anticipates their next move by reading the flow of mana coursing through their bodies. Before they can land a hit, he propels himself forward and delivers a powerful kick to one of them, striking his neck with precision. The last opponent refuses to accept what just happened, but Rei wastes no time, closing the gap again and delivering a punch to his gut. The man crumples to his knees, leaving all 3 of them incapacitated. Before he can react, the warehouse door bursts open with a loud crash. A massive figure steps inside, drawn by the commotion. Rei instantly recognizes him as Humphrey, an executive of the Hector Group. The sheer presence of the man matches his reputation, exuding an overwhelming pressure as streaks of ominous purple lightning crackle behind him. Assessing the scene, Humphrey lets out a long sigh, acknowledging the defeat of his subordinates before declaring that it's time to discipline the troublemaker. Understanding the danger, Rei wastes no time and rushes forward, aiming for a decisive blow to Humphrey's gut. The attack lands, but Humphrey remains entirely unfazed. Without hesitation, he counterattacks, his massive hand descending toward Rei. Reacting instantly, Rei sidesteps, barely avoiding the strike, and notes how absurdly fast Humphrey moves despite his size. Leaping backward to create distance, he watches as Humphrey acknowledges his speed with a smirk. It becomes clear that this fight is on a completely different level. As Humphrey charges again, fist poised to strike, Rei instinctively realizes that a head-on confrontation is nearly impossible. If he wants to make it out, he will have to find another way. Rei ducks under an incoming attack, assessing his only real option, exploiting openings when his opponent lets his guard down. With that in mind, he pulls back his fist, now glowing red as mana surges into it, pressing it against Humphrey's chest. A burning sensation spreads across the larger man's skin, but in that brief moment, Humphrey realizes the attack was merely a distraction. By the time he reacts, Rei is already gone. The pursuit begins immediately, with others calling out that if he really fought Humphrey, he couldn't have gotten far. They spread out, searching every possible hiding spot, and Rei quickly understands that they have him surrounded. If he doesn't find a way out soon, they will catch him. Scanning his surroundings, he spots an opportunity and makes his move. His pursuers catch on quickly, shouting that he's near the entrance and shifting their focus in the wrong direction. Using the distraction, he climbs up onto a fence and leaps over it. He takes a moment to process what just happened. He successfully looted the infamous Hector Group's warehouse. If they catch him now, they won't hesitate to kill him. Yet, dying isn't his biggest fear. If he's gone, the kids under the bridge, the ones who rely on him, won't last long. And if that happens, he won't be able to repay his debt. That thought alone keeps him moving. Before he can put more distance between them, one of the guards spots him and shouts, immediately giving chase. Rei glances back, realizing he has no choice but to keep running. The others quickly join the pursuit, forcing him deeper into the alleys. His luck runs out when he reaches a dead end. Trapped, he comes to a stop as they taunt him, amazed at his speed but confident that it won't help him anymore. Gunshots would tear through the space if he made a wrong move. Demanding that he return what he stole, they threaten to put a hole in his stomach if he refuses. Rei quickly scans for Humphrey but sees no sign of him. That means the 2 standing in front of him are still manageable. Humphrey is the only real threat. One of them lunges, demanding a response, and swings wildly. Rei sidesteps, deflecting the strike, and counters with a brutal uppercut to the chin. Blood sprays from the man's mouth as he collapses to the ground. His partner rushes in to retaliate, but Rei grips his wrist, infusing his hand with aura, effortlessly halting the attack. The man stares in shock, unable to comprehend Rei's strength. Before he can react, Rei channels lightning into his free hand, raising it to the man's face. A surge of energy courses through him, sending violent jolts through his body. His screams echo through the alley before he collapses to the ground, unmoving. The brief silence is shattered by voices in the distance. Others have heard the commotion and are closing in fast. Rei knows he can't keep using magic endlessly. His stamina has limits and reinforcements will keep coming. Spotting a garbage bin nearby, he makes a split-second decision and dives inside. Moments later, his pursuers rush past, determined not to let him slip away. Hidden within the trash, he remains perfectly still, waiting for the right moment to escape. As the footsteps fade into the distance, Rei remains hidden, realizing that since they failed to find him, he might as well use this chance to rest for the night. Holding a knife to his stomach, he considers the risk of leading them back to the bridge, where the kids would be in danger. The steady rhythm of rain against the garbage bin fills the silence as he wonders when it will finally stop. His exhaustion catches up to him, and his eyes slowly close as he drifts into sleep. By morning, the rain has ceased and a sliver of light peeks through a crack in the bin. He stirs awake, assuming the area should be empty by now. Before he can move, a voice cuts through the silence, startling him. Turning quickly, he sees one of his pursuers standing before him. The man smirks, remarking that it was fortunate he returned. His gaze lingers on Rei, reading the color of his vessel, and the intensity of it confirms what he already suspected. Rei is still furious, yet far from fully recovered. A twisted grin spreads across the man's face as he notices the knife in Rei's grip, interpreting it as a challenge. Without hesitation, he lunges, declaring that he won't hold back. Raising his own blade high, he swings down, fully intent on ending it right there. Rei sidesteps, narrowly avoiding the strike, but the man anticipated the move, instantly adjusting for a counterattack. The blade whistles past, grazing Rei's hair as he loses his footing. Off balance and vulnerable, he barely registers the next attack descending toward him. Just as the blade is about to reach his eye, a deafening gunshot echoes through the air. Even the birds scatter in response. Blood splatters across Rei's face as his opponent collapses, the back of his skull torn apart. A new figure stands in the aftermath, gun still smoking. With an amused smile, he acknowledges the danger of the situation before casually lighting a cigarette, exhaling a plume of smoke as he comments on the mess Rei created so early in the morning. This is Niles, the black-haired boss of 17th Street. Rei notes his presence with mild surprise, remarking that he isn't usually awake at this hour. Niles confirms that someone called for him after hearing Hector's men were prowling around, so he decided to check in. His eyes flick toward Rei's jacket, immediately recognizing where the stolen goods came from. Calling Rei bold, he questions if everything in his possession was taken from Hector. Rei offers a word of thanks, but Niles makes it clear that it wasn't a compliment. Acknowledging the difficulty of the situation, Rei reflects on how dealing with people like Niles is never easy. Some individuals, like him, have such a controlled emotional state that their vessel never truly fills up. Niles, unimpressed, warns that Rei is going to get himself killed if he keeps this up. There are certain people he simply can't afford to cross. Rei dismisses the concern, stating that if he doesn't, starvation will be the only alternative. With a sigh, Niles remarks that his debt is now repaid. Rei reminds him that when he pulled him from the river, it wasn't out of kindness. He thought he had found supplies and never intended to help. Niles laughs, pointing out that he still survived because of it, while Rei insists that debt has already been settled. A memory from 1 year ago surfaces. Rei recalls the moment he unknowingly fished Niles out of the river. At the time, Niles claimed to be an executive of the 46th sector who had been betrayed. There was no reason to believe he had lied about that, and the structured fighting lessons he provided in return were proof of his experience. Now it's clear why Rei is as skilled as he is. Bringing the conversation back to the present, Rei shifts the topic to something Niles had previously mentioned. There's something he wants to discuss. When pressed, he states his intention. He wants to join Niles' organization. If he does, the kids will finally be safe. Niles considers the request, turns away, and leans against a corner as he lights another cigarette. He reveals that he knows about Rei's ability to use magic, catching him off guard. He had suspected it before, thinking he was mistaken when he saw Rei light a fire without a lighter. When questioned about his knowledge of magic, Niles admits to knowing only a few things, mostly from a magician in his previous organization. He explains that mana exists in the air and is used for magic, but only a select few can detect and wield it. Rei asks about colors, but Niles dismisses the idea, stating that mana is invisible. As Ray gazes at the vibrant colors in the sky, he wonders what he is actually seeing and whether there is more to it. Niles, growing impatient, takes a swing at Ray, but he easily dodges. When Ray presses him again about joining his organization, the response is a firm rejection. Niles reflects on the geography of the sectors, all of which lie along the Elton River. He suggests that Ray could escape the slums by traveling upstream to the other sectors, where a better life might be waiting for him. It would be a waste for someone with Ray's abilities to remain in this place. He even offers to find him a car, but Ray refuses, knowing he has responsibilities toward the children in the sector. Niles then mentions his plan to start an orphanage, intending to take kids like Ray off the streets. Ray, unable to read Niles' emotions due to the faintness of his colors, suspects he is telling the truth, given his history of keeping his word. Ray shifts the topic, informing Niles that Hector appears to be preparing for war, as he witnessed truckloads of weapons being delivered to him. Niles acknowledges this, reminding Ray that his earlier actions already escalated the situation. Ray explains that using live ammunition in any conflict here is an outright declaration of war. If Niles loses, the people in the sector will suffer, including the store owners who rely on his protection. Niles dismisses any notion of nobility, stating that his protection fees only seem reasonable in comparison to far worse alternatives. Ray teases him about his reputation, which earns him another swing, though he dodges it once again. A car pulls up, and a man informs Niles that it's time to leave. Before getting in, Niles advises Ray to find another hideout since things are about to turn violent. He then tosses something to him, instructing him to sanitize the cut on his ear before driving off. As Ray watches the car disappear, his expression seems a little lighter. Later, in the central square of 17th Street, Josephine, accompanied by an older woman, calls out to Ray, asking why he didn't return the night before. She rushes to him but immediately notices his battered appearance. Concerned, she questions what happened and begins to cry. Ray brushes it off, claiming he just fell, but she insists it must have hurt. He observes how one person can experience so many emotions at once. Handing something to Josephine, he tells her to go ahead to the tent, promising to join her and Pale soon. She agrees and runs off. The older woman, introduced as Viola, is blind and a storyteller. She mentions that she had been telling Josephine about rainbows. Ray disapproves, believing that such stories might prevent the children from toughening up to survive the streets. Viola, however, argues that if children don't hold on to dreams, then who will? As Ray observes her vessel, he sees a radiant purple mana, an emotion he has never witnessed in anyone else. This unfamiliar sight leaves him deeply curious. Ray warns that she should move elsewhere due to an impending war before walking away, prompting her to call him kind. The next morning he arrives at an inn, knocking on the door and announcing himself for a delivery. The shopkeeper, recognizing him, mentions that Ron had spoken about him taking over deliveries. Ray questions if that's really the case, knowing Ron won't be around due to his broken legs. He asks if the shopkeeper plans to evacuate, pointing out that customers will be scarce if war breaks out. The shopkeeper responds that there might not even be a war, as Hector and Niles are currently in negotiations. As the conversation unfolds, the door opens, revealing a scarred man identified as Hector, accompanied by Humphrey and another figure. Hector takes notice of Ray, expressing surprise at a child working while adults flee. Commending his work ethic, he gives him money to buy himself something and prepares to leave. Humphrey lingers, glaring at Ray with suspicion upon noticing the bandage on his ear. Recognizing him, he remains silent before finally departing with the others. Ray senses that Humphrey has realized something but is unsure why he chose to say nothing. Inside, the shopkeeper rushes to Niles for an update. Niles, cigarette in mouth, confirms that negotiations have failed, leading to an inevitable war. The terms demanded were unreasonable, with Hector's side wanting to absorb his organization. The shopkeeper laments that the store will be closed indefinitely, while Ray contemplates the situation. He realizes that once war begins, movement will be restricted, making food stockpiling a priority. As he leaves, a speeding car catches his attention. Recognizing it as Humphrey's, he notes that such a vehicle is unfamiliar in Sector 15, raising his suspicions. Following it, he reaches the 18th Street base of the Hector group, where the arriving car is met with reverence. A man exits, referred to only as Mage. His presence is striking, and Ray observes an immense, dark blue mana surrounding him, resembling that of golems in motion. Rings encircle his vessel, seemingly controlling the mana's flow. Realizing the danger this man poses, Ray hurries to warn Niles. Back at Niles' base, preparations for war are in full swing. Weapons and ammunition are being distributed as chaos unfolds. Ray rushes in, startling a man who questions his sudden appearance. Dismissing it, Ray asks for Niles' whereabouts, only to learn that he has left to make further preparations. Though unable to explain the nature of the threat, Ray insists that Niles must be warned about a man wearing a monocle on Hector's side. Later, under the bridge where the children sleep, one of them stirs, making a comment about the war. Pale hopes it will not last long, while Ray predicts it will end within a week. When asked who he believes will win, he remains uncertain, acknowledging that both sides are evenly matched. However, for the sake of the children's safety, Niles has to emerge victorious. Ray understands that if Hector wins the war, the children will be sold into slavery. As Pale speculates that the battle has already begun, a massive explosion shakes the area, leaving them unsettled. The noise is unlike anything they've heard before, and Ray senses that something is terribly wrong. Meanwhile, on 17th Street, gunfire erupts as the fighters struggle against a golem, their bullets proving useless. The creature, enveloped in a dark blue aura, unleashes a devastating energy blast, instantly vaporizing one of the men while another is left drenched in blood. As panic sets in, the golem mercilessly tears a man in half before returning to its controller, a man with a monocle who casually remarks on the stench of the battlefield. He instructs the golem to clean up, and the destruction continues. Back at the underpass, Pale grows more anxious as the sounds of battle intensify. Ray prepares to leave, but Pale insists they should stick together. Ray, however, tells him to stay with the children and promises to return. As Ray ventures out, he finds the city engulfed in flames, littered with corpses. Among the fallen, he spots a familiar face, one of Niles's men barely clinging to life. The dying man reveals that Hector's forces brought a golem, controlled by the man with the monocle, and that Niles's group was no match. With his final breath, he urges Ray to flee before succumbing to his wounds. At the underpass, Pale is gravely injured, clutching one of the children while the others lie lifeless around him. As the golem prepares to fire another devastating beam, Pale calls out to Ray in his final moments, pleading for him not to return. At the same time, Ray reaches the central plaza, realizing he is too late. Niles's men have been slaughtered, but Niles himself is nowhere to be found. A massive explosion in the distance draws his attention, and he races back to the underpass, only to witness the aftermath of the golem's attack. The place he once called home is now nothing but ruins. Standing before the devastation, Ray's heart sinks. He is unfamiliar with the emotions coursing through him, but for the first time rage consumes him. His mana flares as he launches himself at the golem, striking with everything he has. The golem reacts, its instincts sensing danger and counterattacks, sending Ray crashing into a wall. As he struggles to rise, he resolves to ensure the safety of those who remain, no matter what it takes. Ray is struck with horror as he recalls the first time he met the group, their warmth and how they treated him like family despite not being related. Memories of their kindness flood his mind, especially Pale's words urging him not to return, perhaps to shield him from witnessing the carnage. As Ray looks around, he sees the bodies of his comrades scattered on the ground, blood everywhere. He calls out to them, the names of the fallen echoing in his mind. The shaking of his hand betrays the weight of his grief and regret, feeling he hasn't repaid them for their kindness. The golem approaches, its ominous presence signaling another deadly attack. Ray struggles to move, his injured body trembling, but he forces himself to take action. As the golem charges up its beam, Ray realizes it was the creature that killed everyone, the children, Niles's men, the innocent bystanders in the street. His desire for vengeance intensifies as he prepares to fight back, but before the golem can fire, a car unexpectedly crashes into it, sending the beast flying into a nearby wall. Niles emerges from the wreckage, rushing to Ray's side, relieved that he's not seriously injured. Ray shares the grim news, and when Niles sees the aftermath of the slaughter, he clenches his fist in regret. Niles, filled with sorrow, apologizes, but Ray reassures him that there's no blame. The two share a heartfelt embrace, but the moment is short-lived. Ray inquires about Niles's subordinates, only to learn that they are all dead, and Hector is responsible. Before Niles can finish explaining the next steps, the golem fires a devastating beam, piercing Niles's chest and splattering Ray with blood. In shock, Ray holds Niles as his breath fades. Niles struggles to stay conscious, laughing bitterly despite his injuries, but soon collapses. Ray, desperate, calls out to him, but Niles's life slips away. Ray is consumed with rage as he recalls the bond they shared, training together, sharing meals, Niles' fatherly guidance. The fire of vengeance burns within him, fueling his resolve as he faces the golem. With his eyes blazing red, Ray prepares his own retaliatory attack. The two forces collide in a spectacular beam battle, the sheer energy of their clash creating a blinding light. Ray's red aura intensifies, overpowering the golem's attack, and with a surge of power he destroys the beast, leaving nothing but scattered debris and scorched earth in his wake. After the battle, Ray shakes Niles' lifeless body, his worry evident. He refuses to accept Niles' death, but Niles, though in pain, tells him to stop. He acknowledges the inevitability of his fate, accepting it with no regrets, even as Ray struggles with the loss of someone he considered family. Niles reflects on his past, acknowledging how much he has achieved despite his difficult beginnings. He wonders if things would have been different had he struggled earlier. Around Ray's age, his own life had started to change. As Ray prepares to get medicine for him, Niles grips his hand and with a fading smile, urges him to leave and find a better path. He sees Ray as a younger brother and hopes he will push forward, avoiding the pitfalls that trapped others. With his last bit of strength, he tightens his grip before his life slips away. Ray realizes Niles has stopped breathing and is suddenly overwhelmed by emotions. His breathing grows erratic before he unleashes a scream, recognizing rage and despair as the first true emotions he has ever felt. Later, he wakes under the bridge, sunlight pulling him from sleep. The pain in his arm lingers and he recalls everything that happened, his emotions once again thrown into turmoil. Something within him has changed. Clutching his chest, he pulls his hand away to reveal flames, stronger and more intense than before. He recognizes that his magic grows in proportion to his emotions. Rage amplifies its strength. A sudden headache forces him to acknowledge that he has pushed himself too far. Surveying the covered bodies of Niles and the fallen children, he steels himself for the next step. Revenge is now his only path and he is willing to do whatever it takes. At the central square of 17th Street, Niles' men move the corpses while bystanders quietly discuss the outcome. The shopkeeper comments on the Hector group's victory, lamenting the difficulties ahead, while another warns him to keep his voice down. Near a parked car, Hector leans back, seemingly at ease. Ray, holding a knife, finally tracks him down. As Hector speaks about Niles' failure to cooperate, Ray channels his magic, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Before he can act, Humphrey places a hand on his shoulder, urging him to wait. Ray, however, reacts instantly, slicing his throat with the blade. Humphrey steps back, trying to de-escalate the situation, but Ray understands that anyone aligned with Hector must die. Without hesitation, he launches an attack, overwhelming Humphrey with his relentless strikes. Humphrey, struggling against Ray's newfound strength, quickly realizes the dire situation. In a desperate move, he allows himself to be stabbed in the shoulder, using the moment to grab Ray by the collar and slam him into the ground. He questions whether Ray truly intends to throw his life away over revenge. Recognizing a chance to speak, he makes an offer, drawing Ray's interest. He reveals that he has been watching him for a long time and asks him to hear him out. Ray considers his reputation, knowing Humphrey is known for his precision and silence, yet now he looks desperate. Convinced of his sincerity, he listens as Humphrey urges him to leave Sector 50. When asked why, Humphrey reveals the truth. His brother was sold to the City of Mages by Hector. To gain information on his whereabouts, he was forced into 10 years of servitude. By now, his brother would be Ray's age. Ray questions why he should care, and Humphrey explains that Ray's ability to use magic makes him a key player in this struggle. He proves his knowledge by revealing a burn scar, evidence of Ray's powers. However, he warns that Hector remains out of reach. The real threat is the terrifying mage always by his side. Ray perceives Humphrey's fear clearly, his essence darkened by genuine terror. The mage is no ordinary enemy. Those who displease him are frozen solid, and one victim was drowned simply by having a bubble of water placed over his head. Ray is confronted with the reality of his situation as he grapples with the power of his opponent, a skilled and ruthless mage. The mage warns him to leave for now, emphasizing the importance of survival in order to seek revenge later. Ray acknowledges his lack of formal training in magic, relying only on his intuition, while his adversary is a seasoned expert, making the odds of victory slim. He learns that the City of Mages is situated upstream of the Elton River, a place that only mages can access. Humphrey, handing over his life savings and a slip with his brother's details, places his trust in Ray. Despite his doubts, Humphrey believes in Ray's potential, citing his previous victories and abilities that could match even a high-level sector. Ray, understanding Humphrey's sincerity, agrees to help on the condition that the bodies at the underpass are dealt with first. Humphrey promises to do his part and Ray heads out, determined to follow through. As he sets off, he assures that he will return. Reaching the corner of 17th and 18th, exhaustion catches up to him, but he confirms that no one is following. Approaching Viola, he tosses her a coin, pressing for a quick answer to his question. He asks whether the story about the rainbow is true, the belief that finding one grants a wish. A memory resurfaces of Josephine describing a rainbow to him, her excitement evident as she explained its vibrant colors appearing after the rain, comparing it to a bitten donut. Ray had casually remarked on his plans to get donuts for everyone, but Josephine had scolded him for missing the point. As Viola responds, she acknowledges the existence of rainbows but remains uncertain about the wish. Ray studies her essence, seeing the same deep purple light without any distortions in her mana, leaving him unable to determine if she is lying. Humphrey had mentioned that a mage had come searching for something, a rainbow, implying that there must be some truth to their power. Ray asks if finding one could truly allow him to make a wish and bring back the dead. Viola merely smiles, neither confirming nor denying, suggesting that if it were possible, one would need to follow through to see. He notices a flicker in her energy but cannot tell if it shifts. She states that no one knows where rainbows are and if they do exist they are likely far away. He thanks her and advises her to move elsewhere. Later, on the outskirts of Sector 50, Ray stands in an alley on 23rd Street. The location matches what Niles had written on the paper, a blue abandoned building. A whip rests in front of it, and he recalls Niles mentioning that a car had been prepared in advance. The vehicle, a four-seater sedan, sits waiting. As Ray grips the handle, a voice calls out, questioning his identity and noting his resemblance to Niles' brat. The speaker, clearly a junkie, presses him about orders to take the car and demands to know Niles' whereabouts. Ray realizes that despite shaking off Hector's men, trouble still lingers. There is no time to waste. Tightening his grip on the handle, his movement does not go unnoticed. The junkie, recognizing the intent, lunges at him, demanding to know where he thinks he is going. Ray manages to slip inside and shut the door, but before he can fully close it, the junkie forces his hand against it, preventing it from sealing shut. Ray, struggling with the effects of excessive strengthening magic, finds himself drained of mana as he confronts an aggressive figure demanding entry. Channeling a red aura into his hand, he executes a swift and precise attack, causing the man to collapse. Without hesitation he drives away, leaving Sector 50 for the first time. As he continues along the river, birds scatter from the ruins. Stopping to check the trunk, he notes Niles' preparedness but realizes that reaching the next sector will take days. Setting up camp, he reflects on his knowledge of mana, recognizing two distinct types. One that can be used freely and another requiring color combinations. Experimenting, he discovers that emotions enhance mana flow, though losing focus causes it to dissipate. Attempting to merge different mana types, he watches as vibrant colors swirl before breaking apart, revealing the difficulty of compatibility. Understanding that successful combinations demand significant mental effort, he resolves to keep experimenting, acknowledging the necessity of adaptation. Gazing at the night sky, he finds newfound motivation beneath the aurora borealis. The next day he resumes his journey, stopping at a rock to continue training. His efforts yield small successes, producing ice, wind, and stone from his fingertips. Realizing the importance of efficiently storing mana, he decides to seek answers upon reaching Sector 49. Back in Sector 50, near the bridge on 17th Street, the area is in chaos as men scramble in search of something. The mage overseeing the search demands an update, but the response is disappointing. One of the men apologizes, insisting that with more time, they will find the golem. The mage, unimpressed, raises his cane and orders him to hold the end. Fear overtakes the man as he hesitates, then slowly reaches out. The moment he grasps it, ice rapidly spreads up his arm, freezing him completely. His agonized screams are cut short as the mage taps the cane against him, shattering his frozen body into pieces. Dismissing him as useless, the mage clicks his tongue in irritation. A sudden shout draws attention. A discovery has been made. A man presents a fragment of the golem, noting signs of a recent battle. As the mage inspects it, he detects lingering mana in the air. The magic used here was strong, its trace is still present. Following the residual energy, he turns to another man, questioning whether anyone lived in this area. The response confirms that street children once occupied the space before likely fleeing due to the war. Curiosity flickers in the mage's eyes as he considers the idea of an orphan wielding magic. At first, the thought seems absurd, but as he dwells on it, amusement takes hold. He laughs at the impossibility, dismissing the notion that a child from the streets could master such an intricate craft. The sheer complexity of manipulating elemental magic among endless possibilities is beyond comprehension. His conclusion is simple: another mage must have intervened and destroyed the golem. However, the unlikely scenario lingers in his mind. If by some miracle an orphan had done this, then that individual would be a prodigy unlike any before, a potential archmage of unparalleled talent. Meanwhile, when Ray finally reaches Sector 49, the scene before him is incredible. Ray recalls a conversation with Niles at an inn, where Niles compares the 42nd sector to their current location, noting its chaotic state. He describes the differences in size, architecture, and layout between sectors, explaining that changes become more drastic the further upstream one travels. Later, in the 49th sector, Ray marvels at its sheer size, noting the absence of golems, which he had previously seen in the 50th sector. As he moves through the city, he overhears conversations about mining wages and navigates the densely packed streets. Determined to uncover more information about magic, he focuses on finding details about a mage and vessel circles, believing them to be crucial for his revenge. He also considers looking into prismatic colors and the city of mages. Concerned about his financial situation, he acknowledges the money given to him by Humphrey but remains uncertain about how long his journey will last. Stopping in front of Veronica's bookstore, Ray contemplates the meaning of its name, associating it with a person while questioning the purpose of a bookstore itself. A memory surfaces of Niles teaching him to read, using dirt to form letters and instructing him to write "brother." This lesson, though simple, became his foundation for literacy. Peering into the bookstore, he is perplexed by the shelves filled with square objects, each containing something unique. A woman suddenly accuses him of breaking a window and attempting to steal her books, expressing frustration and anger. As she scolds him, he perceives a mixture of emotions radiating from her vessel, wondering if it is possible to feel so many at once. She warns him about approaching adults, though he remains unaware of her meaning. Dismissing her as strange, he continues through the city, catching the cautious glances of slum children. Recognizing their wariness, he assumes they see him as a potential threat, much like in Sector 50. That night, resting in his car, Ray reflects on his fruitless search for information on magic and resolves to continue exploring the next day. Suddenly, he notices movement outside. The same group of slum children has approached. They debate whether to kill him, take his belongings, and steal his car. As they make their move, Ray swiftly retaliates, shattering the car window and striking one of the boys, sending him to the ground. Without hesitation, he charges another, landing a decisive blow to his chest, rendering him unconscious. A third boy attempts to ambush him, but Ray effortlessly counters, causing the attacker to collapse in fear. With his weapon in hand, Ray delivers repeated strikes to the remaining boy, who screams in terror. After the confrontation, the defeated group sits before him, their expressions filled with regret. Ray demands to know how many streets the group controls, but they hesitate to respond. Frustrated, he intensifies his gaze and insists on an answer. One of the kids hesitates, unsure whether to speak, until Ray swings near his head, forcing a quick confession. The boy reveals they control 3 streets, but Ray senses his fear and anxiety through his vessel. Accusing him of lying, he stomps on the boy's hand repeatedly until blood splatters, prompting desperate apologies. Turning to another kid, Ray demands the truth. The boy, already resigned, immediately admits they control 14 streets and have a total of 52 members. Their leader, Kedrick, commands them from an abandoned factory. Realizing their group is larger than expected, Ray orders the boy to lift his head and asks for his name. He introduces himself as Neshu. Pressing further, Ray inquires about the orders given by their leader. Neshu confesses that they were instructed to beat him within an inch of his life and steal his food. When asked for more details, he hesitantly adds that their leader has been watching everything. Suddenly, one of the kids lunges at Ray from behind with a knife. Without hesitation, Ray releases a blue aura, recognizing the hidden observer. The force of his energy sends the attacker flying backward. The kid, overwhelmed by the sudden burst of power, struggles to comprehend what's happening as wind and dust swirl violently. In an instant, Ray delivers 2 swift strikes, one to the face and another to the chest, dropping the boy to the ground. Standing over him, Rei issues a warning, gripping his hair and radiating a murderous presence before heading back into town. Reflecting on his surroundings, Rei notes that the people of Sector 49, like those in Sector 50, have no understanding of magic. He recalls hearing that books contain vast amounts of written information, reasoning that if all kinds exist, then there must be ones about magic. As he moves through the city, someone steps in front of him, calling out and insisting that he come with them. They clarify that they have no intention of fighting, urging him to relax. Rei questions whether they are associated with the group of kids he defeated the previous night, smugly noting how thoroughly he had beaten them. They confirm his suspicion and explain that their boss took an interest in his fighting skills. One of them retrieves a piece of paper, but none of them can read it, leading to visible confusion. Another admits that someone was supposed to read it aloud, but their plan had an oversight. Rei takes the note, deciding to read it himself, surprising the group with his literacy. When they express their disbelief, he downplays his ability, saying he only knows a little. The message is simple, an offer to work in exchange for never going hungry again. Instead of answering their question about the note's contents, Rei shifts the conversation, asking how their leader was chosen. They explain that leadership is determined through combat, with the strongest assuming command. Satisfied with the response, Rei agrees to go with them. When they ask where, he states his intention to meet their leader. Upon arriving at the abandoned factory that serves as the group's base, they lead him inside. The door shuts behind them, revealing a large gathering of kids either seated or standing around. Their leader, Kedrick, steps forward, acknowledging Rei's arrival with a confident smile. Rei, taken aback, senses an overwhelming concentration of mana, unlike anything he has encountered before. He had previously seen traces of mana flowing from discarded objects, but never anything this potent. Kedrick invites him to sit, stating that he extended the invitation as a guest rather than an enemy. However, the tension in the room is unmistakable. The surrounding boys stand behind their leader, their expressions ranging from wary to openly hostile. Observing Kedrick's demeanor, Rei immediately recognizes the attempt to establish dominance. Kedrick, despite being around the same age as Rei, demonstrates a remarkable level of leadership. Seeing Rei in person strengthens his interest in him, acknowledging his composure under pressure. He inquires about Rei's origins, having heard that he arrived by car. When Rei reveals he is from Sector 50, the entire group reacts with disbelief, as no one has ever heard of someone coming up from there, only descending from the higher sectors. Kedrick dismisses the chatter and expresses admiration if the claim is true, then extends an offer to join their organization. He explains that they are on the verge of becoming part of a well-known group, the Merc Red, an elite force from Sector 45. Their acceptance into this organization is contingent on reaching 66 members. He frames this as an opportunity for Rei to elevate his status. However, Rei responds that joining a group isn't difficult, but he refuses to serve under someone weaker than him. His statement shocks the group and Kedrick's irritation becomes evident. He challenges Rei's claim, questioning whether Rei truly believes he is stronger. One of Kedrick's subordinates takes offense and attempts to interject, but Kedrick swiftly silences him by gripping his throat and lifting him off the ground, making it clear that interruptions are not tolerated. As the man struggles, Rei discerns that Kedrick is using strengthening magic, though not from his own ability. The power is emanating from his ring. Wanting to test its influence, Rei snaps his fingers, severing the mana flow from the ring. Kedrick glances at it but merely laughs, brushing off the momentary disruption. Rei pushes further, maintaining that Kedrick is weaker than him and declaring that he will defeat him. In a sudden burst of rage, Kedrick hurls a table past him, demanding he repeat himself. Seeking validation, he turns to his men, who immediately affirm his strength. Rei, however, notices how the ring reacts to Kedrick's emotions and suspects its influence runs deeper than just physical enhancement. Determined to settle the matter, Rei challenges Kedrick for leadership. Kedrick accepts, but instead of an immediate battle, he schedules it for a week later, ensuring that all the gangs in the area will witness the outcome. He implies that Rei will soon regret his decision, but Rei remains unfazed. Before parting, Rei inquires about the ring's origin, and Kedrick cryptically suggests that he will learn the truth only if he wins. The next day, as Rei roams the streets, he contemplates the ring's nature. Before he can dwell on it for long, he senses something rapidly approaching from behind. Turning just in time, he catches a rock aimed at his head. A group of kids, wielding baseball bats, jeer at him, questioning his presence. More figures emerge, blocking his path, threatening him for walking through their territory. They assert their control over the streets and warn him against running, eager to put him in his place. Unimpressed, Rei dismisses their words, urging them to fight rather than waste time talking. It has become clear that news of his upcoming battle with Kedrick has spread, prompting others to challenge him. While Kedrick's gang refrains from attacking him as ordered, rival factions see him as a threat to their dominance. In response, multiple groups have formed alliances to hinder his movements. Yet, despite their efforts, everything is unfolding just as he intended, making their opposition irrelevant. As Rei continues to refine his magic, he notices that his spells are becoming more potent and his casting speed is improving with experience, provided his mental power remains intact. Engaging in fights proves to be a useful tactic, but his attention shifts to something else. Someone has been observing him. Turning toward the street, he calls out to the hidden figure, who hesitantly steps forward. The boy appears nervous, his gray hair and emotionless expression making him stand out. He quickly assumes Rei must be the hunter he has heard so much about. Despite his small stature, the boy moves alone, something Rei finds odd given his apparent lack of combat ability. When Rei questions him, the boy, introducing himself as Philip, clarifies that he is not there to fight. Instead, he presents an offer and leads Rei toward their destination. As they walk, Philip explains that he works near the Easton garbage dump and has heard countless rumors about the hunter. The name has spread due to the way Rei, a stranger, has defeated others so effortlessly. Eventually, they arrive at a large warehouse, and Philip enthusiastically welcomes Rei inside. The place is bustling with activity, revealing itself to be more than just a simple shelter. Philip, calling it the Philip Hotel, proudly claims ownership of the place. Rei takes in the scene, noting that there are over 100 people present. Philip corrects him, saying there are exactly 186, including those outside. Rei immediately recognizes a common trait among them. They are all either very young or physically small, making it difficult for them to join any other groups. Philip elaborates that in Sector 49, the mines claim many adult lives, leaving behind an excess of children. Since shops are often willing to hire them and existing street groups cannot accommodate them all, he has struck a deal. By monopolizing available work and offering bribes to certain groups, he ensures the survival of these outcasts while acting as a broker and providing shelter. When Rei asks if he built all of this on his own, Philip confidently confirms it, emphasizing the effort he put into establishing such a system. Their conversation is briefly interrupted when a boy named Jonathan rushes over. Philip checks in on his restaurant job, and Jonathan assures him that everything is going well, handing over next month's rent. After thanking him, Philip discreetly verifies the payment in his notebook, recording the transaction immediately. When Rei curiously asks about the notebook, Philip explains that it is essential for managing the hotel. He even offers to let Rei examine it, though he doubts he will understand much. Flipping through the pages, Rei finds an entry about himself, listing rumors of his origins in Sector 50 and noting that he lives in a car. The entry is even marked in red, signaling its importance. Philip, surprised that Rei can read, quickly apologizes, admitting that he enjoys observing people. Rei, unfazed, tells him there is no need to apologize since it does not bother him. Relieved, Philip leads him deeper into the warehouse, introducing him to two men. One of them immediately reacts with suspicion, questioning Philip's decision to bring an outsider into their space. Philip reassures them, reminding them that he had mentioned inviting the hunter as a guest. Philip leads Rei inside, stating that this space is his own and inviting him to make himself comfortable. Rei admits that his first impression of Philip made him suspect a scam, but Philip assures him otherwise, emphasizing that credibility is the foundation of business. Money can be regained, but once trust is lost, it is difficult to recover. Rei observes that Philip does not seem to be his age and presses him about the proposal he previously mentioned. Philip appears nervous but steels himself, recognizing the necessity of pushing past his apprehension for the sake of profit. His eyes gleam with excitement as he finally presents his offer. He wants Rei as his business partner once he defeats Kedrick and assumes leadership. Rei watches him, noting a shift in his presence. The dark energy that once surrounded him has lessened, replaced by a newfound confidence. When questioned about the likelihood of victory, Philip acknowledges the possibility of failure but remains convinced of Rei's chances. His reasoning is based on observation, a skill he prides himself on. Philip explains that careful scrutiny of a person's behavior reveals much about them. He points out a particular habit of Rei's, his tendency to lower his gaze when speaking, focusing on people's chests rather than their eyes. While Philip is unsure of the cause, he speculates it may be linked to a past trauma. As he continues, Ray interrupts, pressing him for more details on other habits he has noticed. Philip mentions how Ray always steps with his right foot first when rounding a corner, likely an instinctive readiness for potential threats due to his right-handedness. He also highlights patterns in Ray's fighting style. Ray acknowledges that no one has ever analyzed him with such precision before. Most people perceive him superficially, viewing him as menacing or abnormal. In Sector 50, this perception followed him everywhere. Even now, he struggles to feel emotions beyond anger and sorrow unless he consciously focuses on them. Philip, however, seems like a clue to his emotional growth. Philip then assesses Kedrick's weaknesses, explaining that he often loses control in combat, whereas Ray remains composed and reads his opponent's movements, which increases his chances of victory. Before Philip can finish outlining the details of payment, Ray abruptly accepts the offer, catching Philip off guard. He insists that the specifics can be figured out later but warns Philip not to take the matter lightly. Amused, Philip agrees, but Ray has a condition. He needs Philip to use his connections to locate something for him. 2 days later, Ray sits by his car while a mechanic works beneath it. The mechanic remarks on the car's rough state, joking that it looks as if Ray crossed the desert. He also notes Philip's clear interest in Ray, as it is rare for him to send someone as skilled as himself for a task. Ray remains silent, merely observing. The mechanic asks for a wrench and a 6mm nut, prompting Ray to use mana to levitate them from a nearby toolbox. The mechanic, momentarily confused, questions whether the items had always been there before laughing it off. With the repairs complete, the mechanic explains that aside from the engine overheating, the vehicle was in decent shape. He replaced the coolant with a high-grade version he secretly obtained from his shop, ensuring it would run smoothly. He casually remarks that Philip had requested the favor, adding that Philip is his benefactor. Without him, he would have struggled to find any work, which is why he willingly shares a portion of his earnings with him. Ray receives a message from an acquaintance who hands him a paper, explaining that memorizing the entire message would have been difficult. The man bids farewell, referring to Ray as the hunter. As Ray examines the note, he recalls a recent conversation where he had requested information about mages. Philip had assured him that his information network could gather details quickly, especially on anyone even remotely suspicious. Sitting in his car, Ray reviews the collected intelligence, acknowledging the volume of information acquired in just a few days. While much of it seems unimportant to him, one particular detail captures his interest, prompting him to investigate further. He observes a man carrying 2 large boxes and eliminates one suspect based on a missing distinguishing mark. His attention then shifts to an individual involved in an unusual incident. A pipe, falling from above due to an accident, was seemingly deflected by a sudden gust of wind, sparing the man from harm. Notably, he exhibited no surprise, reinforcing the possibility that he might be a mage. As Ray emerges from an alley, he finds himself in front of Veronica's bookstore, where a group of kids loiters outside, discussing the situation. They note that the store remains closed and speculate that it might soon go up for sale. Their conversation reveals that someone is offering double payment if the store is sold, and they intend to escalate their actions by throwing rocks at the second floor, hoping to drive the occupants out. The girl from before steps outside, confronting them and accusing them of throwing the rocks. Though she stands her ground, Ray observes that her mana reflects both courage and fear. The kids mock her, pointing out her trembling, and express resentment over her having a home while they lack a place to stay. As she insists that the adults will handle the situation, a rock is thrown near her head, startling her. The group continues their harassment, emboldened by the lack of resistance. One of the boys prepares to throw another rock directly at her face. As Ray moves to intervene, he hesitates upon witnessing a sudden burst of light blue mana from her outstretched hands. A gust of wind deflects the rock, shocking the kids. Though confused, they dismiss the event as a trick and attempt to throw more. Ray, however, immediately recognizes the magic for what it is. The girl, overwhelmed by the situation, demands that they leave. Instead, they mock her further and launch another barrage of rocks. Closing her eyes, she realizes she cannot deflect them all. At that moment, Ray raises his own hands, releasing his own mana. The resulting gust not only stops the rocks but forcefully hurls them back, striking 2 of the kids directly. Startled and in pain, they begin to cry. Emerging from the alley, Ray casually tosses a rock into the air as the frightened kids look on. He glances up at the girl, greeting her in a way that leaves her visibly surprised. Shortly after, the kids are seen beaten up in an alleyway, and the girl expresses her gratitude to Rei for helping her. He dismisses the need for thanks but brings up something he wants to ask. They both end up asking nearly identical questions, one about magic and the other about being a mage. Realizing the coincidence, she invites him inside to talk. Inside the bookstore, she introduces herself as Veronica, the daughter of the shop's owner. Rei shares his name and she apologizes for yelling at him before, explaining that she had mistaken him for the troublemakers throwing rocks. He acknowledges the misunderstanding and she expresses appreciation for his help, admitting that she would have been in serious trouble without him. He insists that it wasn't a big deal and mentions that he was only interested in looking around the bookstore, though meeting a mage was an unexpected benefit. Surprised by his reaction, she comments on how people usually accept gratitude more openly. Rei then asks where she learned magic and she explains that her grandfather took her and her siblings in. When he inquires if her grandfather is also a mage, she confirms it and offers to go upstairs to inform him before they meet. Noticing a cut on Rei's cheek, she tells him to wait. He brushes it off as a minor wound, but she insists that it could get infected. Placing her hand on his cheek, she channels icy magic to cool it, but the effect goes beyond that. The wound completely heals. With a sigh of relief, she considers the job done. Rei, intrigued, questions how she accomplished that. She simply refers to it as healing magic, but he presses further, mentioning white mana and its properties. He recalls being told that mana is invisible and realizes that mages seem unaware of its existence. Veronica refers to the energy she used as the element of regeneration, explaining that healing magic primarily relies on a single element but can incorporate others for assistance. Rei, curious, asks how many elements exist, and she estimates that over 20 natural ones exist, with more than 100 if additional types like amplification and disturbance are included. He acknowledges that he has learned something new and considers that he might gain even more insight by meeting her grandfather. Veronica confirms that her grandfather is upstairs but mentions that he is seriously ill and unable to leave his bed. She asks him to wait while she checks if he is awake, then runs upstairs, promising to return soon. While waiting, Rei scans the bookshelves, noting their titles. Aware that books are valuable, he refrains from touching them to avoid reducing their worth. He reflects on his lack of hygiene, realizing the last time he bathed was when it rained clean water. Though he is not particularly bothered by bad odors, he assumes others are and wonders if Veronica is simply tolerating his presence. His attention shifts to a table holding journals rather than regular books. Among them, he notices one studying elemental distribution by sector and another discussing the expansion of black rain. As Veronica comes back downstairs, she fails to see him, assuming he left due to her delay. However, he suddenly speaks from behind her, startling her into a scream. Regaining composure, she scolds him for being so quiet and questions if he was looking around the store. He confirms that he was searching for books on magic but couldn't find any, leading her to ask if he even checked the book titles properly. Veronica acknowledges that Rei is more intriguing than she initially thought. When he inquires about her grandfather, she explains that he is currently asleep and suggests that Rei return the next day. She appears uneasy as she makes the request. As Rei prepares to leave, she suddenly asks why he is so interested in meeting her grandfather, suspecting that it was his intention from the beginning. After a moment of thought, he reveals that he is searching for something: the prism. Later in the afternoon, Rei sits inside a cafe reviewing his notes. Across from his location is the residence of the man who had the pipe incident. Hoping to uncover useful information about magic, he waits. At that moment, Joni arrives with food, surprising Rei. Joni explains that the meal is complimentary, calling Rei a hero to the local kids. Although Rei did not expect the gesture, he decides to accept it and takes the opportunity to ask Joni a question. Joni, in a joking manner, offers to reveal anything, even the storage password of the establishment. Rei declines that offer but instead asks about the accuracy of the man's schedule. Joni assures him that it is precise, as he has observed the man entering and exiting the basement of the nearby building at the same time every day for the past 3 months. Before Joni can continue, someone calls out, demanding that he stop slacking. Joni rushes off, reminding Rei to reach out if he ever needs anything. Rei estimates that he still has an hour before making his move. Finishing his meal, he takes a sip of his drink and then notices the man from his notes. Observing the rings on the man's fingers, Rei recalls seeing something similar on a mage with a monocle. Convinced that this man must also be a mage, he quickly leaves the cafe, thanking Joni on his way out. Joni acknowledges him, expressing that it was an honor to serve him. Now following his target, Rei remembers that the man only stays out for about an hour. Seizing the opportunity, he sneaks into the building and descends toward the basement, finding it locked as expected. Despite the obstacle, he knows he cannot afford to turn back. As he concentrates, he feels the mana reacting within him, swirling and flowing into the keyhole. Ice spreads across the lock, freezing it open. Stunned by what he just accomplished, he momentarily questions the phenomenon but quickly refocuses on his goal. Inside, he notices a garbage bin filled with crumpled paper and sighs in relief, realizing it is not what he feared. Shifting his attention, he searches for information about the mage, eventually coming across a letter the man had been writing. The contents mention a red bloodstone that has been growing stronger, as well as something about 66 orphans. Based on the details, Ray suspects that this man might be a former executive of the Red Merc, the same organization Kedrick had spoken about. The letter suggests that the man has been expelled. As he continues investigating, he senses something emanating a red aura. Opening a container, he finds a collection of jewels, identical to the one embedded in Kedrick's ring. Realizing this must be the red bloodstone mentioned in the letter, he notes that its mana behaves differently, absorbing ambient energy with far greater efficiency. Intrigued, he wonders what effect it would have on his magic. Testing his theory, he conjures a flame in his hand. The resulting fire is not only larger than usual but also deeper in color. He notes that the process took less time than expected, demonstrating the stone's influence. However, his experiment is interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. The man has returned far earlier than anticipated. As the door opens, the man grumbles to himself, annoyed that he forgot his wallet. He laments his growing forgetfulness, suspecting it may be the reason his boss abandoned him. Speaking in third person, he inadvertently reveals his name, Walter. Determined to regain his place in the organization, he mutters his plans aloud. Hidden near the door, Ray remains silent, observing. Walter continues talking to himself, mentioning that he needs to buy extra supplies this time so he won't have to leave again soon. As he moves to depart once more, Ray sees an opportunity to escape. However, before he can act, Walter suddenly pauses, recalling something else he needed. Walter grips the doorframe, mentioning his need for rat poison before turning his attention to Ray with a sinister grin. He reveals that he was aware of Ray's presence all along, prompting Ray to attack. His blade connects, drawing blood, but Walter remains unfazed, cursing as he clutches his wounded face. Ray steps back as Walter, wiping blood from his eyes, questions whether he is an assassin from the organization. Dismissing that notion upon seeing his young opponent, Walter demands to know how the door was unlocked. Without hesitation, Ray charges forward, determined to subdue him and extract the information he needs. However, Walter uses strengthening magic, catching Ray's blade with his bare hand. Amused, he taunts Ray for underestimating an adult, though his trembling hand betrays his struggle. Ray quickly deduces that Walter infused mana into his hand to reinforce it, allowing him to block the strike without injury. Drawing his weapon, Walter warns that he had been holding back but will no longer restrain himself. He lunges at Ray, who begins analyzing the magic technique used against him. As Walter's attack descends, he is shocked to see Ray mimic the ability flawlessly. Unable to comprehend how Ray replicated a technique he claims to have invented, Walter is caught off guard as Ray counterattacks. Though he evades the first strike, Ray's follow-up lands, cutting into his side. Wounded and bleeding, Walter laughs, convinced that Ray was sent by the organization. He recalls rumors of an assassin capable of copying magic and assumes his opponent fits that description. Ray, remaining in the shadows, lowers his voice to conceal his identity and demands answers. Walter, still amused, acknowledges the rumors but refuses to yield, deciding instead to force his former boss to recognize his abilities. Suddenly, Walter ignites his own body, summoning a massive firestorm within the room. His skin chars as he declares his intention to confront his boss personally, daring Ray to survive long enough to deliver the message. The raging flames generate intense mana flow, causing red energy to surge through Walter's body and blood vessels. The sheer force of it threatens to overwhelm Ray, who relies on his own mana to withstand the heat. With a triumphant roar, Walter channels the energy into a powerful dual flame attack, launching a fireball directly at Ray. Reacting quickly, Ray manipulates swirling mana of various colors to counter the blast, dispersing it in multiple directions. Walter laughs, insisting that if Ray was truly an assassin, he should be capable of magic on this level. As their confrontation continues, Walter warns that playing defense will only deplete Ray's mana. Ray, recognizing the danger, realizes he cannot approach due to the surrounding flames. his protective barrier won't hold much longer. Meanwhile, Walter brings his hands together, intensifying his power, preparing an even stronger attack. Ray dismisses his protection magic, deciding to focus on extinguishing the fire instead. Walter, bewildered by this sudden move, notices water forming around him and struggles to understand how Ray is wielding two primary magic types simultaneously. Realizing that Ray may not be the assassin he initially assumed, Walter is caught off guard as Ray coats his fist in water and strikes, unleashing a vortex that overwhelms him. Once the dust settles, the aftermath reveals Ray drenched, with water pooling around him. His nose bleeds heavily, a consequence of pushing his magical abilities to their limit. Reflecting on the battle, he acknowledges Walter's strength and the incredible efficiency of his magic. The experience makes him reconsider his current power level, realizing that he is still far from ready to exact his revenge. Despite managing to seize a few bloodstones, he regrets not taking more. The following morning, Ray arrives at Veronica's bookstore, where she immediately notices the change in his attire. He explains that he discarded his raincoat to avoid recognition, ensuring Walter wouldn't connect him to their encounter. As they converse, Ray catches sight of two children anxiously watching him before quickly shutting the door. Veronica introduces them as her younger brothers, Malta and Jalfin, whom her grandfather took in from the orphanage. When Ray questions if this was for the purpose of teaching magic, she confirms his suspicion, surprised that she had overlooked that detail. She then leads Ray inside to meet her grandfather, Graham. Upon meeting Graham, Ray immediately senses the presence of a powerful mage. With 4 rings engraved on his vessel, Graham surpasses the strength of the previous mage Ray had encountered. Expressing his gratitude, Graham acknowledges Ray's help in dealing with the troublemakers Veronica had faced, something he himself could not handle due to his deteriorating condition. Ray downplays the difficulty of the task while analyzing Graham's vessel, recognizing the layers of emotions it holds. Unlike conventional mana, these emotions have left permanent traces, making them difficult to interpret. Graham then turns the conversation to Ray's inquiries, noting that Veronica mentioned his proficiency in magic. When Ray admits there is much he does not understand, Graham assumes he must be from elsewhere and asks about his origins. Sensing Ray's hesitation, Graham proposes a game where the winner of each round gets to ask the loser a question. As he releases a controlled flow of mana, Ray immediately reacts, demonstrating his sharp perception. Graham acknowledges Ray's keen senses and explains the nature of the magic between them. He describes the element of maintenance, an essential force that allows magic to sustain itself without external interference. Graham explains that the element of maintenance is the most difficult to control due to its role in sustaining homeostasis. Ray, however, surprises him by sensing another element within it, one with distinct shades of gray. This revelation astounds Graham, who realizes that Ray has identified the elements of maintenance and continuation with ease, something that even experienced mages struggle to accomplish in a lifetime. This discovery is bittersweet for Graham, as he recognizes Ray's rare talent yet laments that he has little time left to live. Instead of revealing the name of the second element outright, Graham insists that Ray must win their game to earn the answer. The challenge is simple. A sphere formed from 2 elements hovers between them, and the goal is to pull it toward oneself. Since Graham is the more skilled mage, he offers a handicap by positioning the sphere closer to Ray. Understanding the difficulty of the match but acknowledging the fairness of the setup, Ray agrees to begin. However, before he can react, the mana is instantly drawn away, and the sphere lands in Graham's hand in the blink of an eye. Stunned by the sheer speed, Ray realizes the gap in their abilities. As the victor, Graham claims his right to ask a question and inquires about Ray's magical training. Ray responds that he is self-taught, which surprises Graham yet again. When Ray asks whether this is truly rare, Graham deflects, reminding him that answers must be earned by winning. Determined not to keep losing, Ray immediately requests another round. Once again, Graham effortlessly secures victory, reinforcing that the game hinges solely on one's ability to handle mana rather than the number of rings a mage possesses. Realizing that he is only revealing information about himself without gaining anything in return, Ray strategizes a new approach. The next round begins with both competitors pulling against the sphere, their magic clashing in a battle of force. Ray subtly alters his technique, imbuing his left hand with magic in a way that Graham did not anticipate. This shift in tactics grants him victory, prompting Graham to acknowledge his adaptability. As per the rules, Ray earns the right to ask a question and chooses to learn the true nature of mana. Graham explains that mana is the fundamental element composing all things in existence. While it cannot be directly seen or touched, its presence can be inferred through secondary phenomena such as lightning, fire, and hail. Only a small fraction of humans are born with the ability to perceive mana, but sensing it and manipulating it are entirely different skills. Ray seeks clarification, asking if the talent Graham refers to is the ability to control mana itself. Though it technically counts as a second question, Graham overlooks it and confirms that the true skill lies in separating and combining mana's elements in precise proportions. He notes that individuals who understand themselves deeply tend to possess greater talent in magic, as the discipline is intrinsically tied to self-exploration. He recalls an old saying that mana responds to those who are honest with themselves. Ray contemplates this wisdom while the next round commences. However, instead of being pulled toward Graham, the sphere unexpectedly moves toward Ray. Graham, astonished, remarks that the element of maintenance is notoriously difficult to control, yet Ray is grasping its properties in real time. Relieved by his success, Ray prepares to ask his next question and directs it toward understanding the rings that mages carry within their hearts. Graham describes the rings within a mage as vessels designed to contain and refine mana. As mana from the air naturally accumulates into these rings, a single refinement process alters its elemental composition based on the mage's unique constitution. Ray questions whether refined mana is easier to use than the unrefined mana in the air, and Graham confirms this while emphasizing an additional crucial reason. He explains that while using mana from the air occasionally is harmless, frequent reliance on it leads to mana poisoning. The effects manifest immediately, causing symptoms such as confusion, drowsiness, uncontrollable laughter, sorrowful crying, or even heightened anger. These symptoms vary among individuals, and if they accumulate, they can develop into permanent mental instability. Ray begins to consider the connection between mana and emotions, realizing that unrefined mana induces hysteria. He reflects on why he has remained unaffected and attributes it to his previous inability to experience emotions. He then proposes a hypothetical scenario. If someone could continuously use ambient mana without suffering mana poisoning, would they gain an immense advantage? Graham acknowledges the uniqueness of the idea but states that he has never encountered such a person. If such an individual existed, they would far surpass mages reliant on refined mana, as the limitless supply of mana in the air would make them unstoppable. Shifting the conversation, Graham asks Ray about his aspirations for the future. When Ray responds that there is something he must accomplish, Graham presses further. Ray reveals that his current goals are to kill one person and save another. Graham notes that while he has heard many claim the first objective, the second is unusual. He then offers to teach Ray magic, an offer that surprises him. The idea of a four-circle mage wanting to mentor an orphan from the streets leaves Ray skeptical, suspecting that Graham might expect something in return. However, Graham reassures him that he desires nothing from him. After considering for a moment, Ray accepts the offer. Graham smiles and calls for Veronica, who enters the room. She denies eavesdropping, but Graham assures her that he understands her nature. Inviting her to sit, he reminds her of why he took Malta and Jalfine from the orphanage, explaining that it was to pass down his knowledge as a legacy. He insists that she listen carefully as this concerns the rainbow, something Ray had been searching for. The rainbow is an ancient legend, drawing countless seekers throughout history. Although theories about it vary, they all lead to a singular conclusion: the one who finds the rainbow will gain godlike power, capable of achieving anything. Ray and Veronica struggle to grasp the concept and question what a god truly is. Graham simplifies the answer, describing gods as beings with absolute power, able to impose their will upon the world without limitations. Ray quickly deduces that this is why the monocle mage had also been pursuing it. Before Veronica can ask more, the discussion is abruptly interrupted. A rock crashes through the glass, hurtling directly toward her. As she recoils in alarm, Ray instinctively extends a hand, gripping her shoulder and intercepting the projectile. Although he manages to stop the attack, his hand is injured in the process. The shattered glass surrounding them suddenly halts midair, revealing the presence of wind magic. Veronica, realizing what has just occurred, looks toward Ray. Though his face remains expressionless, an underlying annoyance is evident. He acknowledges that a warning had already been given. Sacrificing the use of one arm should have been enough. Yet, despite this, their pursuers remain persistent, refusing to abandon their demand regarding the bookstore. As Ray assesses the situation, the figures responsible for the attack flee. Graham expresses his gratitude, acknowledging that Ray has saved them once again. He admits that he should be the one handling the situation, but his physical condition prevents him. He hopes that Veronica can heal Ray's injury. She applies her magic to his hand, assuring him it will be fine soon. Ray, however, finds her concern excessive for what he considers a minor wound on someone else and questions whether it is worth shedding tears over. She warns that leaving it untreated will result in scarring, but Ray believes scars serve as marks of honor, reminders of past battles, which he finds appealing. Graham advises Veronica to refrain from using magic before forming a circle, cautioning her about overusing the ambient mana. She acknowledges his warning. Meanwhile, Ray comments on the ongoing attacks with rocks. Graham reveals that it has been happening for over a month, likely at someone's request. He explains that persistent offers to buy the bookstore suggest that the attacks are a tactic to force a sale. When Ray inquires whether Graham intends to sell, he admits that he has resisted the idea until now, but the situation is becoming intolerable. 6 months ago, Graham had opened the bookstore as a place to train his disciples, pouring his life into it. Memories of that moment surface. Veronica and the other children celebrating the store's opening with excitement. It was a deeply fulfilling experience for him, allowing him to meet children and provide books to those in need. However, due to his illness, Veronica has been managing the store in his place. He fears that if he dies, the situation will only worsen, leaving the store run by children alone, vulnerable to those seeking easy prey. Veronica reacts strongly to his decision, adamantly refusing to let him sell the store. Overcome with emotion, she insists that this place represents his dreams, something he has wanted since childhood. Graham appreciates her concern but reminds her that not all wishes come true. She protests, unable to accept the thought of closing the store, but more than that, she fears losing him. Tears stream down her face as she expresses her deep attachment to him. Moved by her words, Graham finds himself tearing up as well. She rushes to embrace him, and he acknowledges that he has placed too much burden on her shoulders. Ray, observing the moment, notices an unusual reddish-pink hue in his vessel. Later, as the black rain begins to fall, Veronica explains Graham's condition. His illness, known as the eternal sleep disease, started 2 months ago. Over time, his waking periods have shortened and soon he will never awaken again. Currently, he can only remain conscious for 2 to 3 hours a day. She asks Ray to return in the morning when Graham is usually awake. Before he leaves, she expresses relief that the raincoat she lent him fits and bids him farewell. Ray recalls Josephine crying in the past. Though he cannot personally relate to sadness, he understands how to offer words of comfort. He reassures Veronica that everything will be fine. Surprised by his words, she tears up once more and thanks him as he departs. Walking through the streets, Ray contemplates the recent events. The 8th Street, where the bookstore is located, falls under the control of the Jeffers gang, and the children attacking the store likely belong to them. He speculates that they have retreated to their hideout because of the black rain. His plan to deal with Jeffer needs adjusting. As he navigates through a junkyard, he decides to find Philip, hoping that he can arrange a meeting with Jeffer. He suddenly halts, noticing a group of people gathered outside a container. He wonders why Kedrick's gang is there while they impatiently discuss finishing their task. Looking inside, Ray sees Kedrick beating someone, Philip. The sight surprises him. Kedrick, visibly irritated, calls Philip arrogant, expressing his disgust. Before he can continue, a scream erupts outside. Kedrick turns, confused, just as the door bursts open. Ray stands in the entrance, gripping one of the gang members by the hair. The other gang members are already incapacitated. Stepping forward, he calls out to Kedrick, who reacts with surprise, questioning if Ray also has business with Philip. Ray glances at Philip's bloodied form, noting that his condition appears dire. Derek stands over Philip, who lies unconscious against the wall, and questions Ray about his association with him. Ray, aware of Philip's condition, chooses not to answer directly, knowing he has no business ties but does owe Philip for past favors. Seeing no alternative, he steps between them, deciding to protect him as repayment. Derek notes Ray's choice and considers the possibility that he has grown impatient, wanting to fight before their scheduled duel. As Derek speaks, Ray observes his vessel, noticing a significant increase in mana since their last encounter. He then clarifies that his arrival was not for battle but to investigate the commotion. Turning the conversation, he demands to know why Derek attacked Philip. Derek dismisses the question, instead inquiring whether Ray is here with some business proposition, mocking the idea that Philip always seeks out the strong to benefit from them. Frustration overtaking him, Derek moves toward Philip, disgusted by the mere sight of him. Before he can act, Ray swiftly intervenes, grabbing Derek and throwing him back. Caught off guard, Derek regains his footing and charges at Ray with a reinforced punch. Ray calmly analyzes the attack and chooses to block it with his hand. They exchange intense glances before Derek orders Ray to leave, insisting that this does not concern him. Ray, however, questions Derek's reasoning, prompting him to reveal more of his nature. Derek admits that he cannot contain his hatred when facing the weak. When Ray asks if it is merely hatred, Derek goes further, expressing his deep contempt and revulsion toward them. As Ray argues that such feelings are no justification for violence, Derek, overcome with rage, punches the wall and warns him to stay out of it. Otherwise he will share Philip's fate. Seeing the situation escalate, Derek declares his intention to make an example of Philip. Ray, weighing his options, briefly considers using the gem to end the matter instantly but hesitates due to its unknown side effects. Instead, he attempts to reason with Derek. He argues that punishing Philip now would be pointless without witnesses. If no one sees it, no one will truly understand what happened. Derek, struggling to process the idea, listens as Ray further elaborates. Slowly, the logic begins to take hold, and Derek acknowledges that public humiliation would be far more effective. The thought of Philip reduced to a broken state before an audience amuses him. He agrees, and Ray suggests the upcoming duel as the perfect opportunity, where everyone in Sector 49 will be watching. Still wary of Philip escaping before then, Derek questions what will happen if he tries to flee. Ray immediately assures him that he will take responsibility. Satisfied with this arrangement, Derek accepts but leaves a final warning. If Philip disappears, Ray will take his place. With the immediate danger gone, Ray shifts his focus back to Philip. He crouches down, checking for signs of consciousness. The only response he receives is a faint murmur, barely audible. It is enough to confirm what he feared. Philip's condition is worse than expected. Without hesitation, he carries Philip to the hotel. Upon arrival, he calls for someone to open up, catching the attendant off guard. As the door opens, the attendant, initially irritated about interruptions during the black rain, is shocked to see Philip in such a battered state. Ray wastes no time and asks for help. Inside the hotel, Ray waits patiently while Philip receives medical attention. After some time, one of Philip's guards exits the room and informs Ray that he has regained consciousness and is ready to receive visitors. Upon entering, Ray finds Philip already sitting upright, appearing in better condition than expected. Philip acknowledges the gesture, expressing gratitude for being brought to the hotel for treatment. Ray reassures him that thanks are unnecessary, as he is simply relieved that Philip is alive and well. Shifting the conversation, Ray raises the question that has been troubling him the most: the reason behind the confrontation. He specifically wants to know why Kedrick was fighting so aggressively. Philip begins his explanation, stating that the situation was quite unusual. While scouting Kedrick's territory to prepare work opportunities for the hotel's children after Ray's anticipated victory, he unexpectedly encountered him. Ray remarks that entering enemy territory so recklessly was bold for someone like Philip, who is usually cautious. Philip admits as much, adding that sometimes fears must be overcome. When asked what moments call for such bravery, Philip enthusiastically responds, "When there is money to be made." As he speaks, Ray observes a shift in the glow of Philip's vessel, now radiating more pink than gold, a clear sign of his materialistic nature. This leaves Ray wondering about the source of Philip's relentless obsession with wealth. Changing topics, Ray comments on the apparent familiarity between Philip and Kedrick before their recent fight. Philip is surprised that Ray noticed but insists there was no ill intent in keeping that detail undisclosed. He then shares their history, recalling a time when they were close friends in their youth. Back then they relied on each other to survive, both of them weak and struggling. Their circumstances changed the day they established the hotel. For Philip, it was a moment of pride, proof that they had secured a stable foundation. However, Kedrick's reaction was different. When asked if he was happy with their new life, he revealed his dissatisfaction, expressing frustration at living like rats, always hiding. This revelation shocked Philip, making him realize that Kedrick had never truly been content. On the contrary, he was constantly agitated, obsessively training his body. Philip reflects on how he could have handled things differently. Then, about a year before this conversation with Ray, Kedrick left the hotel, setting off on his own path. Since then, Philip only heard rumors. Kedrick had become a street brawler, engaging in fights like a madman. Ray is skeptical, stating that Kedrick's sudden success in combat could not have been the result of mere training. Philip clarifies that Kedrick was not winning at first. In fact, he was constantly losing as the physical gap between him and his opponents was too vast. Ray then anticipates Philip's next words, concluding that something must have changed suddenly. Philip confirms this assumption, impressed by Ray's insight. At some point, Kedrick drastically improved, becoming much stronger in a short period. Ray presses further, asking if Kedrick has always worn a particular ring. Philip struggles to recall but mentions that Kedrick had recently acquired one, likely something he received as a status symbol after becoming a gang leader. Ray follows up with another pointed question, catching Philip off guard once more. He inquires whether Kedrick had always been violent, though his tone suggests he already knows the answer. Philip admits that Kedrick had not been this way before. His personality shifted after leaving the hotel. This deepens Ray's suspicions, leading him to believe that the mysterious man in the hat may have been the one who gave Kedrick the ring when he was still losing fights on the streets. If this assumption is correct, then all of Kedrick's newfound power stems from the ring. Philip continues, explaining that Kedrick remained distant after leaving. Any attempts to contact him were ignored or met with outright disdain. As he speaks, Ray notices another change in his vessel. It is now fully pink, signaling sorrow and regret. Abruptly, Ray makes an unexpected proposition, asking Philip if he would be willing to speak with Kedrick. The suggestion catches Philip off guard. Ray argues that since they were once friends, there might still be a chance for reconciliation. Philip takes a moment to consider the idea before agreeing that it is indeed possible. Ray then extends an invitation. After the upcoming battle, he will give Philip the chance to speak with Kedrick. Philip initially responds with enthusiasm, but his excitement quickly fades. He insists that entering Kedrick's territory is impossible, as only those affiliated with the three major gangs are permitted inside. As an outsider, he has no chance of getting through. Ray, unfazed, reassures him that there is no need to worry. He already informed Kedrick that Philip would be accompanying him. Philip exhales in relief, surprised by the extent of Ray's efforts on his behalf. However, before he can fully process the situation, Ray calmly explains the condition that allowed him to bring Philip along. If Ray were to lose the battle, Philip would be publicly executed with all the gangs watching. Philip is stunned, unable to believe the terms of this arrangement. Ray, maintaining his composed demeanor, reaffirms the truth of the matter. If Kedrick wins, Philip's fate is sealed. And to make things worse, Ray adds that Kedrick will likely ensure that the execution is as painful as possible. Philip asks if this is some kind of joke, but Ray assures him it is not. Ray then questions whether Philip is afraid. Philip struggles to answer, admitting only that the person who will decide his fate is standing beside him. Ray remains unwavering, assuring him that such concerns are unnecessary. There is no chance of defeat. Philip takes comfort in Ray's confidence. With that settled, Ray considers his next move. If everything unfolds as planned, Philip will owe him a great debt, one that he intends to collect later. Philip, summoning his resolve, confirms that he will accompany Ray to the battle. Ray acknowledges this as a wise decision. Before they proceed, he warns Philip that there is something else that must be done once they arrive. Philip, sensing the danger in Ray's tone, instinctively braces himself for what is to come.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, it really helps. And for more content like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see another part. I'd love to hear your thoughts. See you next time. Bye-bye.